Welcome to this week's weekly webinar on small fly management and how to get rid of those pesky flies that might be inside of your house. My name is Molly Keck and I am an Integrated Pest Management Program Specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in Bexar County. I'm also a board-certified entomologist. So let's start out by talking about what is a fly. Well, flies are their own thing. They're in this order Diptera, and they are mainly a bunch of nuisance animals. Their importance worldwide is that they are some pretty significant health pests. We know that mosquitoes are a type of fly, so they can transmit quite a few number of different terrible diseases. There are some species that can bite and be a nuisance, like horseflies or deer flies, and they're just generally found in unsanitary situations. We can kind of consider these guys to be environmental canaries, meaning that where they are, that means that there is some unsanitary source that is close by. The life cycle of a fly is that the parents, the mother, mates, lays a batch of eggs on a source, on a breeding source. Those eggs hatch and they turn into larvae, or what we call maggots, and they generally will feed and molt 3 to 4 to 5 times depending on the species. The pupa leaves the host and then they emerge as adults to mate and lay eggs. All flies are aquatic or semi-aquatic, meaning that they must lay their eggs on something that has a lot of moisture content to it. The larva of flies varies quite a bit. Some flies can take the form of maggots that we're very familiar with, like the bottom left-hand picture. Above that is a love bug, kind of resembles a small mealworm. Soldier flies have very odd-looking larvae that are very segmented and just kind of a modified version almost of the maggot. And then even mosquitoes are aquatic, and the look of their larva is very different from the rest of these fly larvae. So it's important to know where some of these flies originate from. With any type of fly management, it is source control. Figure out where they're laying their eggs, manage and reduce and remove that, and you will remove the flies that are the nuisance. So there are places where these guys can breed are drains and sewers, and these are mainly moth flies and a fly called a phorid fly. There are some species that prefer to lay their eggs on so their babies can feed on rotting fruits and other organic matter. And these include fruit flies, soldier flies, and outdoors, that would be stable flies. In potting soil, we find Fungusgnats. And in carrion or decaying bodies and other organic matter, we would find soldier flies, blowflies, flesh flies, and also those phorid flies. Outdoors, just found outdoors, but not necessarily breeding in a specific thing like potting soil or organic matter or carrion, are houseflies, feeding on trash, crane flies, mosquitoes, and cluster flies. We're really not going to talk a lot about those outdoor flies. We're going to focus on these smaller indoor nuisance flies and gnats. So those that feed in drains and sewers are the moth flies and the phorid flies. The places where they are very commonly found are in commercial kitchens or restaurants, places underneath the tile where tile has been cracked and gunk has been allowed to grow. Think of gelatinous matter, organic matter. So someone's been mopping quite a bit. There are cracked tiles or maybe no tiles underneath those appliances, and those flies can breed there. They might also be breeding in that grate where water has not drained out properly. They might be breeding in areas where there's a lot of just sloshy liquid with organic matter, food material, and maybe even an excess of grease and oil that's built up somewhere. Inside of your kitchen or inside of your home, places where they might be found is also in cracked tiles where you're mopping a lot. Cracked tiles, especially around bathrooms where there might be a leaky toilet and that water is allowed to build up, algae is allowed to form, and they breed in that. It could be outdoors where you have a drip from an AC unit or whatever it might be, but water is dripping out, condensation drips out, and it is allowed to build up. There's organic matter there. If you can see algae that has grown, then that's where they're breeding. Or in this situation, on what looks like to be maybe some saltillo tile, you have a lot of algae matter that in those cracks and crevices is a perfect place for those moth flies, drain flies, or forward flies to breed. So moth flies, commonly called drain flies, are kind of a small fly that when you touch it, they have scales all over their body and they will leave markings on your skin as if you touched a moth. They're not very large at all. When they're at rest, they generally will rest at eye level on the walls or on windows or mirrors especially. So they're really common in bathrooms, and they're common in facilities that have just kind of whitewashed walls. And so you can really see that contrast in the color. If you look at the wings, they hold them and they shape them like a V as at rest. And also if you look closely, you can see that the veins, or the darker portions of the wings, which are called veins, are run parallel. They don't have crisscrosses to them. So they love to breed in drains where organic matter has built up. This is in any drain in anybody's home. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are not clean. They like underneath and inside the cracked tiles, anywhere where gelatinous material is allowed to build up. Forward flies are significantly differently looking than the moth flies. They're kind of humped back when you look at them from the side. They're small gnat-like things, and when you look under a microscope or a hand lens and you look at the veins, they have very few veins on their wings. They like very wet organic sites. They especially love sewers. They also can lay their eggs in carrion, and they also like floor cracks. There are many situations where somebody has an issue with an AC duct that is leaking somewhere, and these will be found in the bathroom where that is starting to build up, especially in new construction for some reason. Other places that these guys could hide are in dirty mops. So clean out your mops, make sure it's not constantly sitting in wet material. And then anywhere where you kind of have that drop down, some sort of ductwork running through a facility, there could be a low spot, something where condensation and water is allowed to build up, and those flies could be coming from those vents. So you really have to be a detective, and you have to look around and figure out where you think that spot might be. If a facility, your bathroom, your kitchen has a musty type smell to it, then they are breeding somewhere there, and you have to figure out where that moisture is that's building up that they're breeding in. So to manage these guys, treat the drains or the places where the gunk has built up. Clean that stuff out. You cannot do this through Drano or products like that are meant to clean out clogs. Instead, you want to use a product like Biofoam or Liquid Alive, I think is found at your local hardware stores. And what this is an enzyme or some other biological agent that you put down the drain, and it eats away at the gunk that lines that drain. And now there's no longer a place for those guys to lay their eggs and breed. You can do things that lots of people like to do, like put boiling water down the drain, put vinegar down the drain, etc., etc. Well, this might kill who is in the drain right now, but it is not going to stop the adults from coming back to lay eggs in the drain. So you must control the source to really eliminate the issue. If you're not sure that they're in a certain drain, take some Scotch tape or some clear tape, fold it over twice so that you have sticky side on the top and the bottom, and place it over half of your drain. Don't cover the whole drain. Make sure you have good airflow, and leave it that way overnight. And in the morning, if they're stuck to the tape, either from the bottom side, then they're coming out of the drain, or the top side, they're attracted to the drain. So this is a fabulous way to determine if that drain is the culprit. Okay, those guys that are going to breed in rotting organic matter include fruit flies, and there's a couple different species, and soldier flies. So fruit flies, true fruit flies have a red colored eye to them. They are found breeding in fermenting fruits, vinegars, grains that have been allowed to ferment and get very wet, and vegetables also. They really especially love bananas. They also love pineapples. It's like you can cut a pineapple and lay it out on the counter, and even if you do not have fruit flies, they will find it. Somehow they come inside and they find it. In nature, they're feeding on rotting fruits. So they're feeding on persimmon trees and things like that drop their fruit, and they're feeding on that. They also especially love tomatoes, potatoes. So this could be that you have a big old bag of potatoes and one potato rolled into the very back of the pantry, and you don't even know that it's there, and the fruit flies can infest that. Syrups as well, and beer and wine are an especial attractant to them. The dark-eyed fruit flies are a little bit less attracted to fruit, and they're more likely to be associated with floor drains and trash cans. And then also dishwashers that get clogged up, or there's food material that never got washed all the way through. So you want to make sure that you're checking your drains and you're checking your dishwasher. You're checking the bottom of your trash cans to make sure that stuff hasn't built up and dripped into those locations, even if you're using liners. Fruit fly life cycle is extremely short. Both the red-eyed and the dark-eyed fruit fly, their life cycle is as short as 8 days. So you could very easily go away on a vacation, forget to take your trash out, and come home to a huge infestation of fruit flies if you're gone for a week or so. So these guys can explode very quickly is the point. Even if you've gotten rid of the problem, they've found another place to generally go to. So you want to definitely search around and try to find all the locations that they could potentially be breeding in. To manage fruit flies, the best thing to do is to take any new fruit or vegetables that you have and do not lay it out on the counter. If it can go in the refrigerator, place it in the refrigerator instead. If it cannot, then put it in, like say bananas, which will ripen up if you put it in the refrigerator most likely. Put it in a paper bag and close it up. That way these flies don't smell it, and if they do, they can't actually get to it. But if it can go in the refrigerator, keep those items in the refrigerator until you have it under control. Don't leave out beer, don't leave out wine. They'll be attracted to that as well. Rinse out your recycling cans, rinse out juice cups. Check every single trash can to make sure, in every single room, to make sure someone didn't accidentally take a soda can or a juice box, drink it, and then throw it in that trash can. If you're finding these fruit flies in odd locations, it's because there's a food source, and most likely it's the trash can that you just didn't think about dumping out. Take your trash out every single night. Don't leave that food in there because they will feed on that stuff. Even if you're using liners, make sure that you clean out the bin every now and then. And then, of course, as I mentioned, rinse out your recycling, your tuna cans, your soda cans, your beer bottles, your wine bottles, those types of things. If outside you had a barbecue and people were throwing food and beer and wine bottles into the trash can, dump that as soon as you possibly can. Because if it's right next door to your back door and you open and close it to let your pets in and out, then you're going to attract those fruit flies into the house, and they're going to find somewhere else to start laying their eggs, and it's harder to get rid of them. Also, make sure that you don't leave dirty dishes in the sink. The last thing that we really want to do after we've been cooking all day long is to do the dirty dishes. But put them in the dishwasher and run it. Even if you have an issue with these flies, you want to not leave the dirty dishes in either the dishwasher or even in the sink. So run the dishwasher even if it's not totally full, and wash all the dishes that you can. What you see there is all sorts of crust and food particles and things that are wonderful feasts for these flies to feed on. If they don't have a reason to leave, then they're going to stick around. Soldier flies are a larger fly that likes organic matter. It's kind of a metallic color. They are pretty reclusive. They really are not super active flying around, but when they buzz by you, they're very loud. So some people think that they're wasps. Their adults are rarely a pest, and the larvae are even rarely a pest, rarely indoors. But where we see them as an issue is where you have compost that you've allowed to get very wet. They love to breed in fruits and vegetable, human and animal waste as well, compost and carrion. So outdoors, they're in your compost bins where you've put those fruits and vegetables, and they've become very degraded. If this is an issue in your compost, if you see them in there, they're really not a problem. It just means that your compost got a little bit too wet. Let it dry out. But they're actually helping break that compost down quite a bit. Add more stuff to it. Give them a chance to break it down. Occasionally they can be found indoors, especially if you have a smaller compost container that you wait to fill up before you toss it out, and it's really started to decompose and the compost is breaking down. But usually if they're a problem inside of the house, it's because you have pets, a rabbit or something that has a lot of fecal material that they have come into and fed on, or you have dog food, cat food, chicken food, rabbit food, something like that that has been allowed to get very wet and they have come in and started to feed on it. Most of the time, you're smelling this issue, you're taking care of this issue before you notice the fly problem. But in some situations, it can maybe go unnoticed. Now, as the weather gets a little bit cooler and we start to have freezing evenings, many of us will bring our potted plants off of the patio or out from not out in the elements, and either bring them under the patio, bring them inside of a greenhouse, or bring them inside of our home. Also, we generally will decorate with poinsettias, and we will have that potting soil sitting in our house for a number of months. And many times we'll start to notice fungus gnats. Outdoors, fungus gnats are feeding on very wet soil. There are some species that are predatory. There are a few species that will feed on roots, but most of the species are feeding on the fungal material in the soil. Why is fungus growing? Because it's very, very wet. So these are kind of a gnat-like pest. Any of the flies have kind of scratchy feet, so if they land on you, they can be itchy, but they're not actually biting you. They're just irritating the skin, and you might have a mild allergy to them. Even after you repot the plants, you might find fungus gnats again. So really the best thing to do is to treat the soil or discard the infested plants and cut back on watering in some way, because these guys are attracted to the fungal material regardless of what species they are, if they're predatory or if they feed on the roots. And so if you don't have fungus growing, you're not going to have fungus gnats laying their eggs in the soil. It is not uncommon that in the nesting material of a reptile, a tarantula, another small animal that you have as a pet, that these guys will start to nest in that material also. So if you see a lot of them, you might look at some of your pet's bedding material and make sure that they're not in that. It is also not uncommon at all to see giant mats of these guys on the move. And you might see this inside of your house if they're moving from a potted plant or another like substance like tarantula bedding, but it's also not uncommon to see that at outside. It's not overly concerning. You can scoop them up and throw them outside, scoop them up and smash them, but it just tells you that this is a mat of fungus gnats leaving to try to find a spot to pupate in. So again, some of your management practices for fungus gnats. First of all, if you're not sure if it's this potted plant, take that potted plant and place it in a small space, a closet, a small room, something like that. Leave it there overnight, and if the gnats are in that room in the morning, then you know that that plant is the culprit. Now you know which plant to repot. So either repot it with fresh soil, clean it out, clean the roots out really well, but oftentimes they will return because there are probably eggs stuck to the roots. You can use BT, Bacillus thuringiensis granules. This will not affect earthworms if they're in that potted plant or other such items. It only affects fly larvae, but you can spread the granules. They will eat on the fungus that hopefully has the bacteria of the BT on it. They get sick and they die. It manages the larval population. If you have no larvae becoming adults, you no longer have adults. And definitely allow the soil to dry out well. Remember, you're watering a little bit too much. Oftentimes this happens because when we're inside, it's not evaporating as quickly as it does outside. So we water the same as we would outdoors, or maybe even a little bit more because those plants are visible to us, but it actually causes more problems than helping the plant. So some of our carrion breeders or filth flies include soldier flies again, blowflies, flesh flies, and also those phorid flies. Flesh flies are hopefully not going to be an issue for you. These are flies that are larger, about the size of a housefly, if not larger than that, and they develop in excrement or flesh or in wounds. So these become a major issue and have been known to have been an indication of neglect in individuals who cannot speak. Individuals with special needs, handicapped individuals, the elderly, or the very, very young. You don't change out the baby's diaper and they can come in and lay their eggs. Of course, there's going to probably be a wound if you're not changing out the diaper very often. Sometimes they can lay their eggs in flesh, wounded flesh, not clean tissue, but compromised tissue. And you could be outside and trying to, you have a wound and they'll come and lay their eggs in there. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon, but hopefully it doesn't happen to you. So to control these guys, reduce the breeding sites. Figure out where that carrion is. Where is that dead body? Where is if you are finding them in your house, did you have a squirrel that died behind your wall? Do you have a dead raccoon up in the attic? That's what these guys are attracted to. They feed as soon as they hatch out. So if they have no breeding site, they have nowhere to lay their eggs, they're not going to continue that life cycle. Blowflies are probably more common than the flesh flies. These guys are metallic. They have the very quintessential maggot type look to them, and they are carrion feeders as the larva, like the other guys are. They're actually a very pretty kind of colored looking fly, but these are not uncommon to find in your trash cans. You have rotten chicken that you threw in the trash can, they're attracted to that. They will feed on fecal material of your pets outdoors. Just rotting, anything that's rotting, dead animals also. If you have a whole bunch of them in one corner of your house, you might suspect that you have something that died behind the walls. Generally, the smell is associated with them, but they will feed on anything that is rotting. So you accidentally threw some rotting chicken in the trash can, you went away for even as short as a weekend, and you're going to find these guys in your trash can. Now remember, the life cycle of these guys is that the adults lay eggs, the eggs hatch, they feed on the host, they hatch a few times, and that very last larva, right before it becomes a pupa, will leave the host, and we call it a ferrate larva. It's like a hobo. It leaves the host, and it finds another location to live. Most individuals that have a problem with blowflies notice them when they're leaving the host. They've left the trash can, and you see them crawling across your floor, and that can be a little bit disturbing. We'll trace back where they're coming from, and that's probably the source where they have been laying their eggs. Everybody deals with houseflies at one time or another inside of their home. These guys are found outdoors mainly, but if you leave doors open, they will come and find their way inside of the house. These are filth breeders. They tend to feed on garbage and trash. So they're in your trash cans outdoors. They come inside. They're still breeding on the trash that's in your house. Common pests in kitchens, especially in restaurants, anywhere where your doors are left open frequently. So on a very nice day, when you open your windows and your doors to get some fresh air in the house, if it's warm enough outside, you're probably going to get houseflies that will find their way inside the home. The hotter and warmer it is, the quicker these guys develop. So the warmer it is, and associated also with rain, we will tend to see huge housefly populations. So summertime is when they're more common, but they can be around all year. Okay, so houseflies commonly breed in manure and garbage. So if you have livestock, you have backyard chickens, you're not cleaning up after your dog in your smaller backyard, they're going to be a little bit more readily out there than if you are cleaning up or you don't have the manure that's out there. If you purchase manure and you put that out as compost, then you might be attracting some flies to the area. They love garbage, so seal things up nice and tight, throw the trash out regularly. If you have dumpsters around your building or around your home for some reason, try to keep them sealed and closed off so that you have less likelihood of them coming to it. These guys don't need to develop. They don't need a lot of time to develop. 7 to 10 days is all it takes from egg to laying their eggs of their own. And the warmer it is, the less time that will take. And they harbor over 100 different pathogens because they're on so much rotting trash. And so this is definitely not something that you want to crawl across your food. You don't want to have a lot of them around food handling areas or outside where you're having your picnics. So for field flies, the blowflies, the carrion breeders, flesh flies, and the house flies, control the trash and the manure. Allow those things to dry out. If you can't control the manure, make sure that you don't have wet, very moist pockets within the manure. Eliminate those breeding sites. Eliminate all the breeding sites that you can think of. If there's still an issue, you can try light traps, screens to keep them out of certain areas, air curtains, if that's a possibility. If you own a building, it's not really possible inside of your house. No, the bags with the penny inside is not going to control your filth flies in any way, shape, or form. No matter what your grandmother told you, it doesn't work. And then as far as chemical control, there are some baits. There's some sprays that they're attracted to, and they'll feed on it, get sick, and die. There are baits that you can get over the counter and hang up. It's very stinky, and they're attracted to the smell. They get trapped inside and can't be removed. And then there are just kind of barrier sprays. You're placing it on places where these guys land and they die from it. But if you don't control the source, you'll never control the adult population without managing the source. Again, I'll just remind you of, show this slide one more time of the origins where flies are found in structures. That way, if you have an issue with these flies, you know kind of what location to look for. So drains and sewers is where you want to look. Rotting fruits and organic matter, potting soil, carrion, garbage, just rotting materials is what they're feeding on. These are flies. They like trash. So that's what you're looking for to try to find the source, eliminate it, and reduce the pest issue. Thanks for joining me for this week's weekly webinar. I hope this helps with any of your fly or gnat problems that you happen to be having inside of the house. If you would like to learn more about other insect issues, make sure you check out our other webinars on this YouTube channel, My Extension 210.